Welcome to The Explainer. Look, we all ask AI chatbots for stuff all the time, right? But what happens when you ask them about the news? Well, a huge new study from the BBC did just that, and the results? They raised some really serious questions about what we can actually consider reliable information these days. Okay, so this whole thing, this entire study, really comes down to just one number, 45%. But what does that mean? Let's dive in. Yep, that's the one. When researchers asked the big AI chatbots to just summarize what's happening in the world, they found that nearly half of the answers had some kind of major flaw. And look, we're not talking about a little typo here and there. We're talking about big, significant problems. So yeah, a 45% failure rate, that's pretty alarming. Let's really dig into what the researchers found when they put these AI tools, the ones we all use, to the test with actual, real-world breaking news. And if you look closer at that 45%, it somehow gets even worse. A staggering 31% of those flawed answers were just flat out seriously wrong. Another 20% had major inaccuracies. And this is often because the AI, hallucinated, which is just a fancy way of saying it made stuff up, or it was pulling from information that was totally out of date. And hey, this wasn't just a problem with one chatbot. Nope. The study looked at all the big players you'd expect: ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, Perplexity. They tested them in a bunch of different languages across several countries just to get a really wide-angle view of the problem. The takeaway from the researchers was pretty blunt. They said this isn't just a few random glitches or mistakes here and there. They called the problems significant and systemic. In other words, this is a deep, fundamental issue with how these things are built and how they work right now. Okay, so we've established there's a big problem, but let's get into the specifics. How exactly are these AI tools getting the news so wrong? Well, it turns out there are some pretty clear patterns. The study found a few recurring problems. For example, the chatbots were just make-up quotes, literally putting words into people's mouths that they never said. They also really struggled with fast-moving stories, getting the timeline all mixed up. And then there's the truly bizarre stuff, like citing a satire website as a real news source, or just inventing these official-sounding references that were completely fake to back up their claims. Now, while all the models had their issues, one really stood out, and not in a good way. The source points to Google's Gemini as by far the worst performer in the study. Apparently, it was especially good at creating these completely fake news summaries that sounded totally plausible, totally authoritative. Okay, so given everything we've just heard, these huge systemic problems with accuracy, you'd think people would be really careful, maybe even a little scared of using AI for news, right? Well, this is where things get weird. The data shows this fascinating and, frankly, kind of worrying paradox. And the source asks this exact question. With a nearly 50-50 chance of getting it wrong, is anyone actually using this stuff for their news? The answer? Well, it might surprise you. So it turns out there's a pretty clear generational split here. Overall, only about 7% of news consumers use chatbots for news. But, and this is the key, for people under 25, that number jumps to 15%. It more than doubles. Younger folks are definitely jumping on this tech way faster. And this is the real kicker. Even with that crazy high error rate, just over a third of these users, especially the younger ones, say they trust the AI summaries they get. It really seems like, for a lot of people, the convenience is just more important than the risk of being wrong. So this whole paradox, this weird trust in a faulty system, leads us to what is maybe the source's sharpest criticism. And it's not about the tech itself, but about how the big institutions are responding to these failures. So check this out. This is a direct quote from the BBC's own program director for generative AI. This is the guy who's presenting these, pretty damning results. And he's saying how excited they are about AI's potential, even with all these problems right in front of him. Now, the host of the source material puts that statement side by side with an analysis of this director's job and points out what looks like a potential conflict of interest. The argument being made is that this person's literal job isn't to assess generative AI, it's to promote it inside the BBC. And, that might just influence how you react to a study that says the tech is deeply flawed. So here's where we are. We've got this unreliable technology on one side, and on the other, this weird growing public trust in it, which brings us to the million-dollar question. What on earth do we do about this?
Well, first, the source actually criticizes the study itself a bit. It says, look, you guys did a great job finding the problem, but where are the solutions? Apparently, the study just kind of stops. It calls for more research and basically hopes the AI companies can be, and I'm quoting here, shamed into giving a hoot.
So the host of the source material doesn't hold back and proposes three really direct solutions. One, for us, the users, just stop using chatbots for news, period. Two, for big institutions like the BBC, stop promoting them for news. And three, this is the big one, make the companies legally liable for the stuff their chatbots say. And that last point really brings us to the final, most critical question this whole thing leaves us with. If a chatbot tells a lie, and that lie causes real harm, who's responsible? Is it the person who asked the question? Is it the news outlet that's pushing the tool? Or is it the company that actually built it? How we answer that question, well, it's pretty much going to define the future of information.